How much water can you collect from fog? That's a really important question and consideration in terms of whether you'd want to set up a fog catcher on whatever land you're considering. Uh, the common metric that's used for collecting water from fog is the amount of water in volume per area of fog collector material. And the fog collector material is generally placed in a position that's vertical and that's perpendicular to the direction that the wind is blowing. So if my hands are the fog collector, the wind should be blowing this way when fog is present in order for the fog catcher to catch water. The amount typically used, and it's per time interval. So how much water are you collecting per area per time interval? Obviously, time interval is important, and the area is important. And the time interval often considered is the day on the average. I collect water, and my measurements can be down to the minute in terms of how much fog water I'm collecting when there's fog present. But hourly measurements are often used. Daily are often used to determine whether it makes sense to consider a larger installation to collect fog water. The fog catchers that I sell at Bayside Fog Collectors typically are 1 square meter. Now, a square meter, for those of you who aren't familiar with metric, means that it's a square that each side of it is a little over 3 feet long. So imagine that, a square that each side is a little over 3 feet, about 39 inches. So 2 sides to the square, that's a square meter. And those are the sizes I typically use not for collecting large amounts of water, but for determining if it makes sense to set up larger fog collectors to collect larger amounts of water. Typical amounts that are used to determine that are you collecting at least a liter per square meter in a day on the average? There may be days you collect 3 or 4 liters per square meter in a day when there's fog. There has to be fog. There may be days you collect none. If there's no fog, you're not going to get any. On the average, is that amount at least 1 liter per square meter per day? Some places in the world can see up to 15 liters per square meter per day on the average. So if you have a 10 square meter fog collector and you're getting, let's say, 15 liters per square meter per day, that means you're getting 150 liters. Now, what's a liter? Those of you who use metric know what a liter is. A liter is a little bit more than a quart. So 4 liters is a bit more than a gallon. So that's something to think about. Is that an amount that's worth it to you? Don't buy a standard fog collector if your intention is to collect large amounts of water. That's not the intention of them. The intention is to see how much water you can collect so that you could potentially set up a larger system. But some of you might want to purchase a standard fog collector or build one yourself because you're interested in collecting water from fog. That's great. But the amount of water that you're going to get is critical in determining whether it makes sense for you to set up a fog catcher. The other thing to think about is, of course, the type of material. I get that question a lot. What kind of material should I use? The material I use is considered the standard fog mesh material. It's a double layer. It's called a Rochelle mesh. It is what's called a 35% shade coefficient, which means if you shine light on one sheet of the mesh, about 35% of the light will be blocked by the mesh. I use 2 of those parallel to each other. That's considered to be the standard amount or the standard mesh configuration to use to collect water from fog, based on a paper by Robert Schemenauer and Pilar Saracida back in 1996. So that's what I use. Other types of mesh can be similarly effective, but what's interesting is different types of mesh, in my experience, are going to collect slightly different amounts of water depending on the type of fog that you're experiencing. I don't think the difference is as significant as some may be led to believe, but there are times, for instance, where the fog droplets I think are quite small, or I've had a mesh consisting of vertical strings of Teflon. It's not a mesh, but just strings, vertical strings, that are collecting a little bit more than the fog catcher. And they're a smaller area of strings too. But the amount of water we're getting during those events is going to be small anyway because the droplets of fog are so small. When you want to collect large amounts of water, or we're going to be able to, is when the droplets are larger. And they're still small. Even large fog droplets are small. but the type of mesh is going to affect the size of the droplet that it is optimized to catch. That's something to think about, but the standard Rochelle is what I use, and it gives you a pretty good indication of the amount of water you can collect per square meter per day. And if you get at least a liter, then setting up a larger system might make more sense. And we'll talk more about other details of fog collection in subsequent videos.